Here's the thing about Putin that you have to understand in terms of his relations with the USA and other countries is that Russia is not a democracy. Okay? There was a brief period where it was a democracy, and it just, for a variety of reasons, it didn't work out. And there's an idea that's long held in Russia that that they're naturally people for an autocracy. I mean, it's hard as somebody, as an American of long standing, it's hard to understand that mentality. I mean, I can understand it in some ways, but it seems like a very sheepish thing. Um, Now, having said that, I can see where democracies can go nuts, but they don't have to, you know. And by the same standard, any kind of autocracy could go nuts, or maybe by definition is horrible. Um, so, so as a result, Putin cannot be overly friendly or positive publicly towards democracies, right? Because that would invite a comparison of the two systems, which would then highlight that it's not, Russia's not a democracy, because it's not like Putin does everything he can to kind of put forward the sort of, the Russian people really are not, we like autocracy and I am the strong man. But at the same time, he holds to this kind of illusion that it is a democracy, which is a really weird thing to have, a people sort of collectively going along with this lie, this facade that, yeah, we do have elections. Yeah, we are a democracy. No, we're not. You know what I mean? But that's what's happening. So when it comes to the United States and Putin, he can never be too friendly and positive, and that would go for Western Europe, most of Eastern Europe, really. I guess other than Belarus, all of Europe. So when you see Putin really kind of openly showing alliances, strong alliances, it's with dictatorships. It's with Assad in Syria. It's with Iran. Um, it's with Belarus. It's with I forget, it was Venezuela, I think, and Cuba, right? These are all dictatorships, autocracies, and that's who he's openly friendly with. But he's not friendly with, as a regime. The Putin regime is not friendly in a public sense with any democracy, because he can't. It's a contradiction. Democracy has to always be a problem. It has to, a really quote unquote free country needs to be sketchy and not desirable, right? And they have to be antagonistic towards it. Like, look at Kiev. I mean, it's the greatest enemy to Putin is some sort of populist anti-corruption uprising. That's death. That's death for him, and his circles. Um, so I guess that's a key to understanding. He might say some things positive with Trump, but the media in Russia always has to be negative towards the United States. The United States always has to be negative, and what they can pick up on today is the degeneracy, the legitimate degeneracy of the country, which ironically is the direct byproduct of the competition with the Soviet Union, where the United States, felt that it had to no longer be this American kind of country creating itself and this destiny of America. It had to become an international society, and struggling against this sort of evil anti, every anti-family, really, um, kind of the natural order. And I don't mean that in like a hardcore, like Darwinian way, but I mean like, trying to throw off all of the balances and naturally accumulated ideas about things like the patriarch and about ethnicities and about money and about capital and about men and women and like all these sort of the family, all these things, right? Um, so so now we have gotten that the negative degeneracy of that, engaging in that competition, but of course we didn't collapse, right? So we have all that baggage from that 70-year struggle, which really it was, even though there was a period where it was due to the United States, according to Khrushchev, Zhukov, and Stalin, amongst many others, historians, Russian historians, whatnot, though they're trying to kind of push at this now, I think, again. But it's really hard to disagree with Zhukov. I mean, I think in also Stalin and Khrushchev. Khrushchev was a commissar during the war, but that without American Lend-Lease, the Soviet Union would have collapsed. They would not have been able to feed their army, according to Zhukov, according to Khrushchev. I mean, amongst other things, he specifically said that they lived off of spam, and they couldn't have fed their armies without it. And then also Zhukov said that they couldn't have even fought. They wouldn't have had the weapons and the needed infrastructure, the manufacturing to fight. And so did Stalin. Apparently, according to Zhukov, he repeatedly said that. And they both said all these things during the Cold War, which makes it even more kind of intense. And when Zhukov, quote from Zhukov, at least one of them, he says, listen, the tendency today is to say, we did this on our own, but it's not true. So he felt the need to sort of say, look, we have an issue with the Americans now, but the Americans, we owe at least to say the truth that it was the Americans are the reason that we were able to fight. So it's a kind of just a fucked up century of history that we saved this thing that then sort of created a metastasized into our country. And now, if you look at Russia, they're blaming us for the degeneracy that was resultant from that struggle and the openings that it made into our society and the vulnerabilities and the parasites that came to this country and infested centers of power in this country. So we're still involved in all of that. But the point is that Putin has to always keep democracies at arm's length, and he has to always portray them negatively with whatever he can. However he can do that, he has to do that because the autocratic system must not be compared in terms of virtue with the democracy, because he's even maintaining the facade of democracy, at least for now. But he's made it as much as possible into sort of freedom has a negative connotation in Russia. You know what I mean? Which is very alien for a Westerner to understand. Maybe not for long. We'll see what happens. But it's freedom has a negative connotation because of the 90s and the reforms that were not carried out because of Putin. Because Putin is the one who essentially pardoned Yeltsin and his daughter and their entourage for the corruption and the failures that they generated, and then who the evidence is overwhelming. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, by default, but the evidence is pretty overwhelming that the FSB did partake in the apartment bombings in 1999, and so it's not like he just picked up a disaster. I mean, he sealed the deal on the disaster, and Russia is sort of maintaining itself because the living standards, though poor and low in all qualifiers compared to Western Europe or the United States or Australia or Japan or something, or South Korea, though low, with horrible institutions and whatnot, corruption, rife corruption, like, almost like a Zimbabwe. I mean, in that category, Zimbabwe, the Congo, Nigeria level corruption. Nonetheless, the living standards, the money, really, the income is up enough from where it was in the 90s And there are things they didn't have during the Soviet Union. Even those people are getting older and older. Um, that they will put up with Putin and the corruption, which is so rife. And the thing is, the corruption is so endemic in Russia that it's not like you can just point to, a top circle or circles. It goes all the way down. So it's a way of life for so many people that, they're in on it too, But there's enough people that aren't, or that aren't in on it enough, that if there's a huge drop in oil prices, which is Russia's hooked on, like a junkie is hooked on dope, there will be a major problem like Ukraine. So they're coasting on this kind of very relativistic higher living standard based largely on the price of oil. I mean, if we really had an alternative fuels industry, Russia would collapse. You know what I mean? It would implode.